You are about to hear the death row story of a man who murdered a 49-year-old innocent woman on the 9th of July, 1998, in Cedar City, Utah. The heartbreaking nature of this murder shocked the lead investigators so deeply that even the police were desperate to understand why he did it. For 25 years, the state of Utah had not executed anyone. The last execution the state carried out was in 2010, when Ronnie Lee Gardner was put to death by firing squad. But in 2024, that long pause ended because of this man, whose true story I'm about to tell you. His name was Taberon Dave, and at the age of 48, he walked into the execution chamber at the Utah State Correctional Facility to finally face the consequences of the crimes he committed when he was just 22 years old. The emotional moments with his family before his final goodbye will make you wonder if the state of Utah handled this the right way. But before I share the last moments Taberon spent with his family in the execution chamber, we need to go back to the very beginning. We need to see what he did, and most importantly, why he did it. Before we proceed with this case, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to this channel. This channel doesn't just show how men on death row were executed, but we go further, uncovering real and hidden details about their lives long before they ever met their victims, and long before the final verdict was given. Stay with us. Taberon Dave Honie was born on the 29th of October, 1975, on the Hopi-Tewa Reservation in Arizona. He was the eldest of 3 siblings. He was a boy born into circumstances no child should inherit. His father worked in the coal mines, a Navajo man whose hands were always stained with labor and whose throat was worn down by whiskey. Taberon's father carried years of inherited pain and tried to drown it in alcohol. This was his father's pattern, until the day he finally ran from the harsh realities of his responsibilities and never came back home. Taberon was still young when his father left, but he was old enough to feel the hurt it caused. He was young, yes, but old enough to wonder if he or his family had done something wrong to make his father abandon them and leave them to struggle alone. But even after his father walked away, his mother remained. She was a homemaker fighting depression in a place where mental health support was almost non-existent, and the hope for escape was even harder to find. The Hopi-Tewa Reservation faced an unemployment rate of nearly 60%, and even though welfare checks showed up on time, the checks never lasted long enough. Young Taberon, his mother, and his 2 siblings were trapped in a system with limited healthcare. They were weighed down by limited opportunity, and they were surrounded by unlimited despair. By the time Taberon reached adulthood, alcohol had already taken most of his youth. He first tasted alcohol during a family gathering at a very young age, but that harmless sip sparked a lifelong addiction. A few years after that, he got involved in marijuana and solvents, but experts who later testified in his court case tried to make the jury understand that these weren't rebellious teenage experiments. They were survival mechanisms. They were the ways Taberon knew to numb the pain he carried with no other outlet. But little did anyone know that a silent and dangerous chaos was building. Little did anyone know that the stage was already set for a man who would later commit a crime so cruel and savage that it didn't just land him on death row, it made him the first person to be executed in Utah in over a decade. But before we get into how he met his victim and carried out this horrific crime, let's take a brief moment to continue with the background details of how he got there. School gave him brief relief while growing up, and even though school provided structure and routine, he still struggled with chronic truancy and fights with classmates. Taberon dropped out in 10th grade, trading classroom walls for the wide-open spaces of ranch work and odd jobs. His hands learned hard labor, and his mind learned isolation. He suffered head injuries from workplace falls that left him with chronic migraines. He also had untreated fetal alcohol spectrum disorder, which affected his impulse control and judgment in ways no one fully understood or addressed. But in 1995, at 19 years old, Taberon went looking for something different in Cedar City, Utah. He wanted a fresh start. He wanted a chance to build something his father never could. That's when he met Carol Pikyavit at a local diner where she worked as a waitress. Carol was a Paiute tribal member and a single mother. Their relationship moved quickly. The kind of romance that feels like fate when you're young and craving connection. In 1996, they welcomed a daughter. It was Hopi and Paiute cultures blending together, a new family forming, and for a moment, stability felt possible. But old patterns don't disappear just because you change your location or meet someone new. Old habits always find a way to show up again when the right trigger hits. So, even though he was with Carol and they had a beautiful baby girl, Taberon started drinking again. This wasn't light or social drinking, it was binge drinking. The kind of drinking that makes someone black out, the kind of drinking that turns a person into someone unrecognizable. And before long, he and Carol were arguing constantly. They argued about his jealousy. They argued about his possessiveness. They clashed again and again over his inability to trust. To make things worse, Carol worked night shifts, and every time she came home late, Taberon saw it as betrayal. When Carol refused to answer a phone call, he believed she was hiding her infidelity. Records even show that during a jealousy-fueled rage, he once punched a wall so hard he left a crater in the drywall. Could this have been the major warning sign for Carol to realize she was already in danger? Could this have been the moment she understood that she was living with a dangerous man pretending to be her boyfriend? Because very soon, the real Taberon was about to be exposed, and what he was about to do would shock you because it was beyond heartbreaking. But before we get to that part, let's continue the story. In June 1998, Carol left him and went to stay with her mother, and she filed a restraining order. The final straw came when Taberon threatened self-harm to manipulate her. He told Carol that if she didn't come back to live with him, he would kill himself. This was the oldest trick in an abuser's playbook, and Taberon was using suicide as a tool to control her decisions. But Carol didn't fall for it, and she refused to return to live with him. And this is where the story was about to turn deadly. Claudia Ben, Carol's mother, became the target of everything Taberon felt he was losing control over. Claudia was the grandmother of his daughter, and she was 49 years old. Claudia was a respected member of the Shivwits band of Paiutes. She served as a vice chairwoman and a substance abuse counselor. The fact that she was a substance abuse counselor made what was coming painfully ironic. Claudia was a devoted grandmother who represented everything Taberon resented. Claudia stood for stability, respect, and maternal protection. But in Taberon's deteriorating mind, Claudia was the obstacle. Claudia was the reason his girlfriend left and filed a restraining order. Claudia was the roadblock standing between him and his family. Claudia was the voice he believed was telling Carol to stay away from him. Taberon's paranoia turned Claudia into the enemy instead of seeing reality. He refused to accept the truth. He refused to accept that his own actions had damaged the very things he claimed to love. The 9th of July 1998 began like every other difficult day for Taberon. He drank a 12-pack of Budweiser and several shots of whiskey under the afternoon sun. Around 10 o'clock, he found a payphone and called Carol. He slurred demands that he wanted to see their daughter, and records later showed he told Carol that if she didn't come home, he would make her regret it. It was an ultimatum fueled by the false confidence of a heavily intoxicated man, but Carol refused. This wasn't the first time Carol had heard this kind of threat. She felt no alarm because the restraining order existed for exactly this reason. But this time felt different to Taberon. His paranoia convinced him she had already moved on, maybe with a co-worker or some other man. His untreated fetal alcohol syndrome symptoms, which manifested as impulsivity, poor judgment, and inability to foresee consequences, mixed with chronic migraines and alcohol, created the perfect storm for the poor decision he was about to make. He quickly found a cab and headed straight to Claudia Ben's modest ranch-style home on a quiet street. It was the same place where Carol and their daughter were now staying. What began as a desperate attempt to win Carol back would now turn into something no one imagined. Inside the house, 3 young relatives slept peacefully. Their grandmother watched over them, as she had many times before. But what happened next would become one of the most shocking tragedies in Utah state history. Before we dive into the details of the crime, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on your notifications for more death row stories like this. In our previous video, we shared the story of a man who was executed, not just for killing an innocent woman, but because his documented motive was motivated hate toward women. That's a story you don't want to miss immediately you are done with this current one. So, without wasting any more time, let's go back to our current story. Around 10:30 p.m. that night, Taberon Honie arrived at his ex-girlfriend's mother's home at 150 North, 300 West in Cedar City. Inside the home, Claudia Ben, Carol's mother, was babysitting her 3 granddaughters. The youngest of the 3 granddaughters was Taberon's daughter. Claudia had been talking on the cordless phone with her daughters when she heard pounding on her front door. It was Taberon, hitting the door and yelling for Claudia to open up. Records show that while banging on the door, he shouted that he wanted to see his daughter. But Claudia panicked and cracked the door chain, always trying to protect the girls. She told Taberon that his daughter was not in the house and told him to go back home because he was drunk. According to court testimony, what happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. Taberon slammed his shoulder into the door chain hard enough to splinter the wood. The chain snapped. When he forced his way inside, he demanded to know where his daughter was. He asked Claudia if she was hiding his daughter from him. Court records and prosecutors' arguments revealed that he grabbed Claudia and dragged her through the house while her 3 young relatives, including his own daughter, were present in the home. Prosecutors explained to the jury how Taberon overpowered Claudia in the bedroom. She tried to defend herself by reaching for a knife, but he took the weapon she reached for. What followed was a long and violent attack that caused many injuries. Prosecutors called the scene one of the most disturbing investigators had ever seen. The medical examiner later confirmed that Claudia Ben died from the severity of her injuries, which included deep cuts. The timeline shows the assault lasted 20 to 30 minutes. That's about half an hour. That's how long Claudia Ben suffered before her body gave out. And what did Taberon do right after committing murder? According to police reports, his next actions showed a shocking disconnect from reality. He went into Claudia's kitchen, opened the refrigerator, and drank a beer while his daughter and her cousins were still in the house. At 11:45 p.m., sirens wailed in the distance. 30 minutes earlier, a neighbor had called 911 to report suspicious noises or a possible disturbance at Claudia Ben's home. When the police arrived, they found something shocking. Taberon didn't run, he didn't hide, he didn't resist. According to the police report, he even walked onto the porch with his hands raised. The knife he had used lay discarded on the floor. The officers documented everything. They took photos of the crime scene. They saw the smashed door chain and collected the kitchen knife as evidence. They noted handprints and drag marks around the crime scene. Claudia, a woman weighing barely over 100 pounds, had numerous and severe wounds from the attack. But Taberon didn't run, and that surprised the officers. He confessed immediately, without prompting or pressure, as if he knew there was no escape. The magnitude of what he had done could not be erased. 3 witnesses and a body told a story no denial could change. Arriving officers later testified that Taberon gave his confession calmly, clearly stating that he had stabbed and killed Claudia with a knife. In 1999, the Iron County District Court became the place where Taberon Honie's fate would be decided. He gave up his right to a jury trial, choosing a bench trial instead. On April 29, he was found guilty of aggravated murder and sexual assault. Prosecutors showed graphic crime scene photos showing the several wounds the victim secured from the attack, but the defense argued that Taberon was intoxicated, claiming his blood alcohol content was 0.25, and they also cited fetal alcohol syndrome and brain damage from past head injuries. They claimed the crime wasn't premeditated and that he wasn't fully in control of his mind. The judge was not convinced. On May 20, he sentenced Honie to death, saying the sentence was earned, not given, and described the crime as one of the most brutal murders in state history. But this trial was only the beginning. Taberon would spend the next 25 years fighting for his life on death row. 25 years. That's how long Taberon Honie spent on death row at Utah State Correctional Facility. His appeals ran from 1999 to 2024, but every one was denied. On the 1st of May 2024, Utah's Attorney General requested an execution warrant, and on June 10, his execution was set for August 8. On the 22nd of July 2024, Taberon appeared before the Board of Pardons and Parole, admitting he was a monster and had earned his place in prison. His 27-year-old daughter, Tressa, begged for his life, calling him a redeemed father. But Claudia Ben's family demanded execution. On July 26, the Board of Pardons and Parole denied clemency 4-1. Governor Spencer Cox refused a reprieve on August 6. Hours before the execution, the Supreme Court denied a stay 5-4. As midnight approached on the 7th of August 2024, Taberon faced his final hours, the last night of his life. On the night of the 7th of August 2024, Taberon Honie was moved to an observation cell at 6 a.m. The cell had no window, only glass separating him from his family. His parents, daughter, 3 sisters, 2 cousins, brother-in-law, and aunt took turns visiting, with only 2 people allowed at a time. He spent nearly 10 hours with them, but no physical contact was permitted. He declined to see his attorneys. Prison staff described his mood as gracious and appreciative. In the days before, he had participated in a Hopi pipe ceremony and a smudging ceremony. His last meal, at 4:30 p.m., was a cheeseburger, fries, and a milkshake. Then, at exactly 8:30 p.m., the deputy warden announced it was time for final goodbyes. Just after midnight on August 8, Taberon Honie entered the execution chamber at the Utah State Correctional Facility. He was strapped to a gurney, and IV lines were inserted into both arms. At 12:03 a.m., he spoke his final words. "From the start, it's been, if it needs to be done for them to heal, let's do this. If they tell you you can't change, don't listen to them. To all my brothers and sisters here, continue to change. I love you all. Take care." He then thanked prison officials for caring for his family, looked toward the family witness room, tapped his foot nervously, and told his family he loved them. His mother replied through the glass, saying she loved him too. At 12:04 a.m., the first dose of pentobarbital was administered. His chest rose and fell. He took a deep breath, and his skin turned pale, then blue. At 12:13 a.m., a second dose was given. By 12:21 a.m., his heart stopped, the EKG flatlined, and a white sheet covered his body. The curtain was drawn, and the family could no longer see him. At 12:25 a.m., he was officially pronounced dead. 17 minutes from first dose to flatline, 22 minutes from his final statement. His father and cousin were allowed into the chamber to perform a Hopi spiritual ceremony with bird feathers and cornmeal. This ritual was meant to free his soul. This was Utah's first execution in 14 years. It was also the first execution at the new correctional facility. Outside, 240 protesters held vigil against the death penalty. Governor Cox said, "The actions of Mr. Taberon Honie that led to his death sentence are heinous. The state fulfilled its legal obligation." But can a person really change after 25 years? Does executing someone bring closure or cause more pain? Was Taberon Honie a monster from birth, or a victim of circumstance who made terrible choices? As we wrap up this story, don't forget to watch our previous video currently displaying at the top right corner of your screen. This true story is about a man who became the 7th person executed in Florida in 2025. It is about a man who killed a 27-year-old woman in the most shocking way, and when he finally faced trial for her murder, the judge described his actions as savage and inhuman. You don't want to miss it.